Welcome to the webinar Behavioral Strategies, part of the series Executive Function and ADHD. Your presenter today is Shari, Gent, Education Specialist with the Diagnostic Center, Northern California. For those of you that are not familiar with us, the Diagnostic Center, Northern California, is part of the California Department of Education State Special Schools Division. We are one of 3 centers in the state of California. The others are located in Fresno, Central California, and Diagnostic Center South is located in Los Angeles. Our services are free to students who are enrolled in special education or eligible to be enrolled in special education. The California Diagnostic Center North serves 351 school districts throughout Northern California, from Monterey County to the Oregon border. We provide trainings like this one and technical assistance for teachers in the classroom, as well as diagnostic assessments and independent education evaluations. Your speaker today is Shari, Gent, Education Specialist. A little bit more about me. I have over 25 years experience in the public school as a teacher and diagnostician. I am the parent of a young adult who was diagnosed as a child with ADHD. I've been active in Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder, a nonprofit organization, and I was honored to be selected as CHAD Educator of the Year in 2014. Our goals today are, first of all, to identify the unique behavioral challenges faced by students with ADHD, to learn about strategies that address those challenges, and finally, acquire new resources that will help you support students with ADHD in your classroom. To explain executive functions, Dr. Thomas Brown of Yale University likes to compare the brain to an orchestra. The musicians represent the wide range of talents that we all enjoy. The child with ADHD has all these talents and has the abilities of the typical child. All the musicians are present. However, there is one difference. The conductor is missing. This results in lack of organization and coordination between the members of the orchestra, or in other words, between the child's various talents and abilities. We hear the sounds, but there is no symphony. What is it like to have ADHD? Well, let's see how well you can attend. This is a video designed for adults to demonstrate selective attention. Some of you may have seen a video like this in a college psychology course. There are 2 teams, the white shirts and the black shirts. There will be 2 types of passes in this game, overhead passes and bounced passes. Your task is to count the number of bounced passes from a white player to a white player. Let's try one together. That was your first bounce pass from a white player to a white player. Ready? Here we go. How many did you get? The correct number is 4. If you came close, congratulations. But did you see something unusual or unexpected in this video? Let's watch that again. There it is. Do you see the gorilla or the bear? The person in the gorilla costume? If you didn't see it the first time, you're not alone. It's very common when you're very, very focused on counting the passes to miss the odd thing that happens. But now we can understand why our students with ADHD are often frustrated in school. They're missing the special content that everyone else gets because they're paying attention to other things. How does this affect behavior? Let's see what an ADHD child can tell us.
Do you think you move around a lot? Do you think you're
Yeah, I squirm a bunch.
Why do you do that?
I don't know, I just seem to have excess energy all the time.
And squirming is the way of getting rid of it. Well, that makes sense. There's a particular characteristic that some kids who have problems with their attention or squirm a lot have, and I'm going to teach you a new word you've never heard, and then I want you to react to it. The word is insatiable. It means they need excitement all the time.
And that would probably describe me pretty well.
Yeah, and insatiable kids, if there's no excitement around, if things are kind of boring, either that or they can create the excitement.
That sounds a lot like me.
How would a kid do that?
By bouncing around the classroom doing weird things or sitting in a trash can, all of which I've been known to do.
As Dr. Levine suggests, children with ADHD seek stimulation because of a neurological need. Their brain is less active than the typical child's. Any stimulation, whether positive or negative, satisfies their craving for stimulation. Children with ADHD have difficulty using consequences to provide themselves with feedback about the appropriateness of behavior. Difficulty with cause and effect. Consequently, typical behavior plans sometimes don't work like they should for these kids because their behavior is oftentimes neurologically based rather than learned. We're going to talk about 5 basic principles that address those concerns for kids with ADHD. So the first one being structure, predictability, and consistency. These kids really need to trust. They need to believe that when they do something, a reward is going to appear. That their actions have meaning and that their actions will bring them something positive in the future. When we are offering directions, when we are providing instruction, we need to focus on the most salient features. We need to be extremely clear and break things into simple steps. When we're offering reinforcement, it needs to be frequent and positive, and it needs to be very intense in order to get their attention. Also, reinforcement is going to need to be immediate in order for them to make that link between their action and the result. Although we want to have structure, predictability, and consistency, in order to get the attention of kids with ADHD, we need to provide novel elements within that structure. And finally, we need to make instruction highly engaging, perhaps involve motoric movement, whole body movements, all of these things to maximize the student's attention to the task. Let's take a look at some strategies that offer structure, predictability, and consistency. Well, first of all, one thing that we're always going to need to keep in mind is that we need to take some sort of data on the student's behavior. And data is really important because it can demonstrate patterns to us of behavior, and it's the only way that we're going to be able to demonstrate success. Also, it is mandated by IDEA 2004, and it is recommended as best practice by the What Works Clearinghouse in the U.S. Department of Education. This is a practice guide published by What Works Clearinghouse, Reducing Behavior Problems in the Elementary School Classroom. President Obama is still on the cover here, but he still is in the online version that you can download and print, and this can be a resource for you as well. And you'll see in here there's a discussion about the importance of data keeping. So this can be one resource for you to take a look at what things are essential for offering behavioral support. This is an example of a simple behavior rating scale. So behavior can be, you can track behavior by a number of different means. I'm not going to go into all the ways that you can take data in this training. It's beyond the scope of this training. We have several trainings in behavior and dealing with complex behaviors that you could participate in. Pent.org is an organization that also has a number of ways to keep data and data sheets available for you. PENT is a Positive Environment Network of Trainers. I'll be referring to them later in this training. And they are also through the state special schools. And their website is a treasure trove of behavioral strategies. I want to just kind of identify the specific types of data that you could take. One is frequency, marking down the number of times a behavior occurs. Another one is intervals, keeping track of how often a behavior occurs within a specific interval of time, or how many intervals in which a behavior occurs. And then there's duration, how long the behavior occurs. All of those, as well as intensity. So all of those are ways that you can keep track of behavior by counting behaviors, the quantitative way of keeping data. But there's also qualitative data keeping. And qualitative data keeping might be something as simple as writing a few sentences about that student after school about how his or her day went. Another way to keep track of data is through office referrals. So there are many different ways. And again, please refer to our behavior trainings for more information. It's so important when you are working with students who have attention deficit disorder to have a classroom behavior management system. One such system that many of us are familiar with is Class Dojo, which is an online system, and students are able to choose a character as their identity, and then the teacher can keep track of the number of times specific behaviors occur for each student and offer rewards that correspond to that. In addition, there is a parent communication system included in the Class Dojo software. So check it out online. This is a tutorial in how to use Class Dojo. Well, I'll leave that to you to explore in your own time. Another whole class system that is very valuable is Red Critter Teacher. Red Critter Teacher is oriented and can be more effective with some older kids. With Red Critter Teacher, you use actual photos rather than characters for students. So sometimes older kids identify more with having a real photo of themselves posted. Another way to offer behavior support for a whole class is to use concepts from the curriculum. And this particular video at the teaching channel does offer an example of how to use a number line to count positive, desirable behaviors, and also to demonstrate behaviors that are not part of the goals for the class. So if you would like to watch this video, this is the address that you can go to. But it's a very simple concept in that when these kids are learning to use the number line, and they use it for adding and subtracting, but you can also use it to count behaviors. PBIS World is a great resource for you, and I'll be referring to it several times. PBS World does provide a whole set of data keeping resources that you can go to for any number of types of data keeping. And again, you can print these out and use them right from the website. A way to keep data, another way to keep data is the daily report card. And the positive thing about this research-based strategy is that it helps you to communicate with parents. So you choose a few target behaviors, and probably no more than 3 or 4. And then at each period of time in the class, if a student is maintaining that target behavior, they can receive a token reward. And then a copy of that goes home with the student at the end of each day. This is another example of a data sheet that can go home with the student. This one's particularly oriented towards the symptoms of ADHD. And I wanted to mention that Intervention Central has an online behavior report card generator. So if you were to go to this website, you can actually print out a behavior report card that suits your classroom needs.
Finally, a powerful intervention that is most effective when it is coordinated between home and school is the use of a daily report card. A classroom teacher could only be expected to use this with a couple of students who need frequent monitoring and reinforcement. With this system, a few target behaviors are selected based upon the child's needs, and the school day is broken down into short time frames. At the end of each interval, the teacher marks whether or not the child was successful for each behavior. At the end of the day, points are tallied to see if the child met a predetermined goal, such as 70% success. Meeting daily or weekly goals earns the child rewards, ideally by the parents at home or provided at school. Be aware that whatever rewards are selected must be meaningful and motivating to the child, or this system won't work.
And I want to caution you against relying on the families to give the rewards. Oftentimes, rewards for kids with ADHD are most effective when they occur immediately within the environment in which the behaviors occur. Another great structured resource is the Behavior Education Program. This is a Tier 2 intervention, primarily for middle school through high school. Ideally, it can be implemented as a whole school approach, And in this particular system, the student receives immediate feedback and also additional adult support and attention. This is a diagram of how the behavior education program, or check-in, check-out, works. So every day when the student comes into school in the morning, he or she checks in with a designated adult. The adult helps him check to be sure he has his homework in his binder or in his backpack, ready to turn in, and that it's complete. And then he has all the materials he needs for the day. And then when he goes to each class, the teacher checks when he comes in to be sure he has the assignment, and to be sure that he has the materials for that day. And she checks as he or she leaves to be sure that she has the materials and the assignment written down for the evening. In the afternoon, the student, after checking in with each of his teachers, checks in with the designated adult to be sure he has everything he needs before he goes home. And then the parents are involved at home, or some other designated adult at home helps the student check to be sure he or she has everything he needs to complete any homework that he or she has. And now we're going to look at some strategies that support the whole foundation of clarity. When you have students with ADHD, it's essential that any oral instructions that you give be extremely explicit. And one way to do that is to support them with visuals. So supporting them with visual images, with listing the instructions that you're giving, and also keeping those instructions very short. Before you give directions, be sure to get their attention. Check to be sure they're looking at you and they're ready to go. Provide no more than 3 directions at a time. Use the same words consistently. So today is, yesterday was. With younger kids, you can sing-song your directions. That helps them to catch it. Chunk the information. With younger kids, you can clap or tap. And with all age kids, check for comprehension by asking the student to restate the directions in his or her own words. And as I mentioned again, even with older students, it helps to write those directions down or provide some sort of a visual symbol or cue to remind them of what to do from one step to the next. Before you get started with giving directions, one basic principle to keep in mind, as I mentioned before, is to be consistent with how you get the direction, give the directions. And so you want to start by getting their attention. The one spot method is one way to do that.
If a teacher knows nothing else about teaching, but knows how to set the tone of a classroom and have students come in and have some work to do, and then has a strong, effective attention-getting signal, then you can teach. Can I have your attention, please? In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hands free, eyes on me. You get the student's attention from the same spot in the room every single time. I'm going to get your attention by doing exactly what I did in the same way every single time. I will stand in this spot on the floor right here. Make that spot the place where you get their attention and the place where you give direction. And then don't teach from that spot, don't talk to people from that spot, don't explain homework from that spot, unless you got their attention from that spot. Can I have your attention, please? In 5. But the key is consistency. Whatever you say, make sure your students do that every single time. Can I have your attention, please? In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hands free, eyes on me. If you can do those things, you can teach.
As I mentioned, it helps to break directions down into steps. This is an example of a cue card that can be where directions can be individualized for a specific student. But you could also use something like this on a whiteboard. You could project it at the front of the room so that all kids also have a visual cue to help them focus on following the directions. And then this is one that I created for a 4th grade student, and the classroom routine after recess was to go to the library, pick out a book, and sit down and do silent reading. However, the particular student was pretty much lost when he came in from recess. So this cue card, he would check off each step as he completed it. Sometimes kids need to have an adult start by having an adult monitor and then move to self-monitoring. These are the directions for how to use a cue card. It can be laminated, and as I mentioned, the student checks off each step as he or she completes it. But you may want to start with an adult monitoring it and then gradually transition to the student self-monitoring. Moving on to some ways to add novelty to your consistent teaching strategies. Well, one thing is that you want to be sure that any reinforcers that you are using address the student's personal interests and that it's something that they really want to earn. So there are many ways to do this. One is to use a reinforcer inventory. This particular inventory is available on Pent, www.pent.org, and I will show you I will refer to that web address again at the conclusion of this training. This particular reinforcer inventory you could do by interview if the student is not a reader and writer, or you could have kids read and write if they are able to communicate through writing accurately. This is another example of a reinforcer inventory. So in this case, the student needs to choose one of these 2 choices for each item. And each of these choices are coded. So for example, number 6, teacher writes 100 on your paper. And when you reach the conclusion of the inventory, you add up all the A's, and teacher writes 100 on your paper is coded A. And the second choice the student has is classmates ask you to be on their team. That is coded P, or peer approval. So what you find at the end of the inventory is the student must make a choice between each of these, and at the end you add up what their choices are. And you find out which category of reinforcement that student would respond to. This is an example of a picture reinforcer inventory. So you can use photographs of things in your classroom with digital photography available. That's probably the best way to go. So you just take pictures of things in your classroom that you think the student might respond to, and then you have them make a choice by looking at this and circling the activity that they would like to engage in following the undesirable or the academic activity that they need to do. Intervention Central, also known as Jim Wright Online, has a actual reinforcer survey generator. So you can go there and generate a reinforcer inventory that is specific to your class and to your student. Using the good behavior game adds spice to the typical classroom behavior management system. The Good Behavior Game is available commercially through packs, or you can create your own. Let's take a look at how the Good Behavior Game has been implemented in one classroom.
It is a classroom filled with polite and considerate 5-year-olds.
Thank you.
Please and thank yous are the norms, not the exceptions. I spent the day with Sarah Dixon's kindergarten class at Johnson Elementary in the Tucson Unified School District, and I can tell you for sure, good just for me. It's truly the way they always act. Sarah Dixon is a seasoned teacher, and she says she has a formula for success.
It's made my life much easier with class control. I wished I had this game last year.
Her formula for success, it's called the Good Behavior Game. Each table is a team, and throughout the day the kids accumulate either good points called a PAX or not so good points called spleens.
If you don't get any spleens, that means you win.
At any given time, the teacher can do a quiz on the board, and the table with the fewest gets a timed break to get a snack, play with special toys, or just sit by themselves and read. The kids love it, and they work as a team to avoid the dreaded spleens.
It's managed mostly by the students. I do not have to do extra planning for it. I do not have to incorporate it into my lesson plans. That's what makes it so great.
And time after time, when it came to getting kids to act better in class, positive reinforcement worked much better than punishment. Sarah Dixon agrees.
It's been the best thing in my class.
Nancy Montoya for KGUN 9 News. That in a typical class of 5-year-olds, there are up to 200 acts of disruptive behavior per hour.
The moment you introduce the game, you'll see the rates of disruptive, inattentive behavior plummet from somewhere around 100 to 200 times per hour down to about 10 or 20.
It's called game. It's about reinforcing good behavior in the classroom and getting kids to work throughout the day in teams. The Good Behavior Game is creating positive changes in classrooms. Dr. Dennis Embry, a Tucson child psychologist, is helping to distribute the game throughout the country. It works because children are able to concentrate more on their classwork because there's not so many disruptions. Tucson Links funds the Good Behavior Game locally because of the years of research that proves something so simple really works to create a better teaching environment.
And we now have studies using the Good Behavior Game, let's say in first grade, and then following children now up to 21 years of age in a randomized control group study. What you tend to see, for example, is by middle school, there's fewer conduct disorders, less tobacco initiation, crimes committed by the children. By middle adolescence, you see much less involvement with serious drugs and alcohol.
Dr. Embry says the Good Behavior Game is about teaching kids impulse control, something they'll use the rest of their lives.
So that they can control that wiggle disruptive factor by their own power of mind.
Nancy Montoya for KGUN 9 News.
Or you can create your own good behavior game. These are the steps that you would follow in order to create your own behavior game. The video demonstrates the good behavior game in a kindergarten class. However, I have used it in middle schools and divided a classroom into 2 teams. Then we look at what our target behaviors are going to be, and then we have a competition during any particular time of the day. You don't necessarily need to implement the good behavior game all day. You can pick specific target times that may be problematic, where you especially want to have kids learn how to follow the rules. Another way to introduce novelty is by calling on kids at random. This also depersonalizes who you're calling on. Kids sometimes feel, oh, the teacher always picks on me. Well, when you're pulling a name out of a pack of cards at random, or using a cardomatic where the student's name comes up at random, it's no longer personalized. And also, if you really need to have a student respond more often than others, you can always add a few cards into the deck to give that student maximum opportunity to respond. Or you can have the student come up and draw a card out of the deck for help if they don't know the answer.
The tip I have is called the Cardomatic. And what this is a way to call on students. And I write everybody's name down on a 3x5 card, and I hole punch it in the corner and put it on a ring. And what this does is it helps me make sure that I'm calling on everyone and not just the same students over and over again. And also it holds the students accountable for listening to the information. And they have to pay attention because their name could get called at any moment. And after I've called on them once, their name could come up again, so they can't just tune out. So, oh, I already had a turn, so now I can just tune out and think about something else. So being that they're in there twice, they know that their name could come up again shortly. And then they start to memorize where they are in the cards. So that's why I shuffle the cards periodically so they never know. And it also helps with giving those kids that need extra think time. I can use it to forewarn students that they're coming up next in the cards. So when I get to them, it lessens their anxiety because they've had a chance to think about what they're going to say. It's called the Cardomatic.
Moving on to looking at ways that we can provide immediate, intense, and frequent consequences. Be sure to stay positive. Remember that our kids need many more positives than corrections. So in particular, kids with ADHD need 5 positives to any criticism or correction. Be very specific when you're providing praise. Describe exactly what the student did. Not necessarily good job, but say, wow, your writing is really improving, or I see that you're almost done. So describing specifically what they've done. Offer your praise directly following the behavior, and focus on effort, not ability. So you want to avoid talking about grades. Also, avoid talking about how smart the student is. Avoid judging the student's intelligence, because that is not going to encourage motivation as much as rewarding or talking positively about the effort the student is putting in. A little note aside, older students may find it embarrassing to be praised in front of their peers, so sometimes you could slip them a note or whisper or take them aside and let them know how much you're seeing their effort pay off. Praise prompt leave is a strategy that I very much like, especially for kids with ADHD who have trouble getting started with their work. So the way to do this strategy is to provide the student with the assignment and one very simple step. So give them one very simple direction. And even if you say to the class, get out your assignment sheet, and you see that student with ADHD take out his assignment and put it on his desk, and you then need to recognize that small effort. Wow, Sally, I really am impressed with how quickly you took out your paper. So praising that student for something small. And if you need to prompt them the first time, give them a short prompt, and then praise them for doing that correctly. And then give them another very small prompt. And this is where you have to use your teacher judgment. And be sure to teach for success. So know when you give them a prompt, avoid giving them a prompt for something that you know they're not going to be able to do. Once you prompt them, step away. So when Sally gets her paper out, and the next thing I might prompt her for is, Sally, it's time to write your name on your paper. And then step away and give her the opportunity to complete that step on her own. Come back and check, and when you see that they have completed the task that you prompted, go back to step 1 and praise them for doing it. Repeat as needed. Okay, we're going to look at a number of strategies to support student engagement. First of all, think about how you can adapt the environment, the physical environment that is. Many times you can provide students who are seeking stimulation with ways to get stimulation so that they can focus on their work a little bit better. Again, you have to use your own teacher judgment here in terms of how you're going to do this, because not all stimulation is appropriate for all kids. For example, some kids do not handle fidgets well, but some kids do well with fidgets. In this case, we're looking at bouncy ball chairs. And I like this because it's a 5th grade class. The students are all reading silently at their desk, and they have the option to seek stimulation by rocking or bouncing on their ball. So again, these can be used in an appropriate way, and you need to judge for your own students whether the accommodation or the change in the environment will be successful. These are some other possible environmental supports. So the TheraBand for students that kick or maybe try to rub their shoe on the floor. If that's disruptive to themselves or to others, this can be helpful. You can also make one of these using a cloth or a nylon stocking or part of a rubber tire inner tube. This is a wedgie cushion or sit and move, where the student gets some tactile stimulation from moving around on the cushion. Again, I have seen this used in middle school. I once saw a student in the 7th grade who carried this around on her backpack day in and day out, and nobody teased her about it. The school handled it really well. She wasn't teased, and it was used effectively in the classroom to help her focus. And then finally, standing at your desk. We all know that sitting, as they say, is the new smoking. So for our students' best cardiovascular health, as well as to help them pay attention, having them stand while they work can be very helpful. And you don't have to have these fancy standing desks to do it. There are many accommodations and adaptations that you can use that should work, and even just having them stand at a regular desk periodically to stretch and get that circulation going can be effective. All right, where is the best place to seat the student with ADHD? The research shows that sitting the student not necessarily at the front of the class, but within eyeshot and earshot of the teacher is the most effective place for that student to sit. And that a U-shaped array of desks also optimizes attention. So keep that in mind as you're setting up your classrooms if you have students with ADHD in your class. Here's an example of where you would seat the student with ADHD if you had multiple U-shapes, like table groups, and sitting at a single table. Rather than having the students sit next to the teacher, which many of us are prone to do because we feel like we have them more under physical control, if you have them seated directly across from you, in some form or fashion so that you can give them frequent eye contact and that they can hear you directly when you're speaking to the group, that can be even more effective. It's so important to have kids, especially younger kids, use motoric response. And kids with ADHD do well when they're able to use motoric response and active response. Older kids also enjoy offering active response.
Active
This is
learning
an
takes many
example of how
forms.
you can
Many of our students learn best
incorporate active
kinesthetically, with their
responses
bodies in
in
motion.
elementary school
Here are some
classroom.
great examples of kinesthetic learning activities, teaching academic content through the use of movement.
How about 351,240? 351,240. 34,152. 34,152. Go! Do that. Ready? Go. Exclamation! Very good. Hey, Austin, you're up, buddy. Let's read it.
It is such a beautiful day.
It is such a beautiful day. Ready? Go. Exclamation!
All right, these are some additional strategies for active responses. Thumbs up, thumbs down, waving your hand over your head when you're confused, snapping and clapping. We did see snapping and clapping in the video. Using choral responses, quick writes where students have 1 minute to write down or to draw everything they know about a subject. And then we're going to take a look at some others here. Finger and hand signals that indicate specific messages. Using response cards. We saw them using whiteboards in the video. So there's a number of different messages you can place on the whiteboards, or you can create actual laminated cards for students to indicate their response. www.polleverywhere.com is a great website that where you can create online surveys for your students to participate in using their smartphone. So if your school allows you to use smartphones, and this would be particularly effective with older kids perhaps, then they type in a response into their smartphone and this shows up online in the form of a chart or a graph. There's a number of different ways that you can have that show up. And the initial charting and graphing is free. If you want to have more complex participation from your student, there is a small fee. Self-monitoring is one way to help kids internalize motivation. It can be a really super effective strategy to have kids begin to take responsibility for their own behaviors. It can be offered for a whole class. The whole class can self-monitor their behavior. You can do this in a small group, just have selected students do it. You can have peers monitor each other, or you can have just those students that need to learn self-management, self-monitor their behavior and or their academics. These are the steps for basic self-monitoring. So you want to be sure that you have clearly defined what behavior the student is going to monitor. And this is not a program that you go into a room and write up yourself. This is something that you need to do with the student. So you and the student define the behavior. Then you need to take some baseline data so that you know what your goal should be, what a realistic goal would be for this student, because you don't want to set the bar too high. So if a student is only on task, say 40% of the time during a given 15-minute period, you don't want to set your goal for that student to be 100% on task. Instead, you want to have intermittent goals between the baseline and the future goal. Of course, we want to have all kids on task for 100% of the time, but let's start with moving, say, from 40% of the time to 50% of the time. And then you and the student can revise the goal. Define the time period. You don't necessarily want to do self-monitoring all day. Pick a particular time of day or a particular subject that's problematic, because this can be draining for the student. Find a recording form, and I'll show you some resources for that in a minute. Do a trial run. Have the student practice filling out that form before you expect the student to do it on her own. And again, with the student, choose a reinforcer for the day, for the week, or for whatever interval you're working with. And then go ahead, implement and reinforce, and be sure to praise the student directly for using the self-monitoring program, as well as for being on task. And finally, chart the data. Show the student his or her own progress so they can see how they've done over time. This is one way to help a student track their behavior using picture cartoons. We have the desired behavior. This is the behavior that we want to diminish. And then we have, again, the desired behavior. So in this particular data sheet, the student marks down how many times they do both of these. You may want to just have the desired behavior, the count, and the reward. That is oftentimes most effective with students. In order to keep your student honest, sometimes what you need to do is have an adult also keep track of the student's behavior, and then reward the student for if his or her count matches that of the adult. Kid Tools is one place to get some data sheets for self-monitoring of behavior. This is a website provided by the University of Missouri, and there's lots of information here on self-monitoring. This is an example of incorporating goals at school with the school-wide behavior program. The first column is for the student to mark down how they thought they did, and the second column is for the teacher to mark down what he or she thought how the student did, and then the student gets bonus points if their marking compares or is the same as the teacher's. This is a more specific way to break down school-wide rules. So these are the school-wide rules on the left-hand side. These are the periods of the day. And then these are the specific behaviors that the student is working on that correspond, first of all, to being respectful and also to the period of the day. So during calendar, this student is working on keeping his hands to himself, and that shows respect for the other student. He's working on admitting his mistakes rather than having a temper tantrum when he makes a mistake, so accepting those mistakes, and that leads to responsible behavior during calendar. He stays safe by following directions. So all of these are the observable behaviors, and these are the behavioral principles for the school-wide. All right, I am so happy that you were able to join me today for this training on providing behavioral strategies for kids with ADHD. And I wish you the best in taking these strategies out to your classrooms. I hope that you will share with us about how they came out. And I wanted to also leave you with some additional resources. These are 3 books that I have found extremely useful. Sandra Reif's How to Reach and Teach Students with ADD, ADHD. That's the 3rd edition, published in 2016. Chris Ziegler-Dendy's Teaching Teens with ADD, ADHD, and Executive Function Deficits. And that is specific to the older age kids, and it's just a treasure trove of strategies for teenagers. And finally, Managing Challenging Behaviors in School, part of a Guilford series on research-based strategies at work. And this particular book has a large section in it on self-monitoring strategies. And I want to remind you about PENT, Positive Environment Network of Trainers. PENT has a online, actually you can download the Behavior Intervention Plan Desk Reference. That includes many strategies, as well as information about specific handicapping conditions. I also wanted to mention that PENT has 2 symposiums each year by invitation only. However, they do post videos of those symposiums online. So even though you may not be invited or you may not be a behavior specialist, because people who do attend these are either behavior specialists or psychologists, you can still really participate by watching videos online, and the PowerPoints to the videos are also posted. Also, I mentioned PBIS World, which is, again, a compendium of strategies that are correspond to 3 different tiers identified by PBIS. Basically, what you do is you click on a particular behavior or characteristic that you're having to deal with, like impulsive, and then you choose which tier, 1, 2, or 3, that behavior is occurring, and then PBIS World offers you a wide range of choices of interventions that you can try and choose which one works best for your student. And I wanted to remind you of the training course available by children and adults with attention deficit disorder, entitled Teacher to Teacher. This is an on-demand training course available through Pepper and Chad at this website. It does have a cost, but it is an excellent training for teachers on supporting students with ADHD. In addition, I want to remind you, especially for strategies for engagement, to visit the UDL, Universal Design for Learning Center online, where you can find many strategies for representing information in a variety of ways, encouraging kids to express and to share information in a variety of ways, and to stay engaged in learning in many ways. If you have additional questions, please visit our website at this address. You can phone us. When you go to our website, there will be a number of trainings listed, among those in the trainings in general behavior interventions. We do have a goal symposium once a year currently. I wanted to thank you for your attention during this training and to wish you the very best in your work with students who have ADHD.